Yeah, I don't
We're
know. I
supposed
mean,
to wait for.
I think Katie
Katie's going to
said
come
she
and
would,
announce
yeah,
things. Yes.
she would kind of
Feel the vibe.
feel when things are about to start.
People respond to like bells in Buddhist centers, like, you know,
Yeah.
loves dogs. So
Yeah.
Right.
well, something will happen.
Yeah, we'll wait for Emily to decide that it's time. But, you know, we can hang out together here
Yeah.
in the meantime.
Yeah.
Ooh, that sounds like a thing.
See, bells.
Right.
It's like Pavlov's dog. Everybody knows that when the bell rings, you're supposed to sit down.
Don't forget to turn your thing on.
Yeah, I want to wait for Emily
Right.
to. Besides, I'm loud.
Mm.
Can't find the microphone. It's
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Olympic. How many of you are here for the first time? Welcome. How many of you? Welcome.
Thank you.
How many of you know what an Olympic is? That's amazing. Usually next I ask how many people know what an Olympic is because I told them. And I know that you will not raise your hand for that one. But for those of you who don't know, an alembic is an alchemical vessel for transformation. And the alchemists believed that what you put into an alembic would not transform unless you set conditions up correctly in the environment. So there's kind of a sciencey piece, and in your mind. So there's a kind of introspective spiritual piece. And an alembic is where mind and matter meet and transform. And that is our aspiration for this space, this container that we are all in together tonight. So towards that goal, we have classes, workshops, events almost every single day, all around the areas of meditation and movement, neuroscience and scientific inquiry, and inquiry in general, and psychedelic culture, with a particular focus on the weird, nebulous, mysterious, unexplainable end of the psychedelic spectrum, like the psychedelic humanities. For those of you who are here for the first time or who don't come here regularly, the best way to know what's coming up at Olympic is to sign up for our email list, which you can do on the iPad in the lobby. We send out one email a week every Monday, and it is well written. We have like a real writer who writes the newsletter. And we are a nonprofit, and I wouldn't say we're like actively disinterested in money, but we don't necessarily know how to like make it. And that means that we don't sell the email list. So when you put your email address into the form on our website, it goes to us and it will stay there forever. I'm comfortable making that promise. So we don't sell the list. That was a very long way to say we don't sell the list, particularly if you donate to Olympic, then we won't need to. So we are a nonprofit, and we actually subsist entirely, almost entirely on donations from the community. So you all donated something to be here tonight. Thank you, whether that is money or time that you're spending here. Thank you very much. We all create and sustain this community together. And I am glad personally that you are all here, and I'm very happy to welcome Charlie back to Olympic and David to Olympic for the first time. I'm going to tell you a couple of logistics, which I almost always forget to do, so I'm remembering the logistics, and then I'll hand it over to these folks. So logistics. You are allowed to have tea in this room. You are not allowed, however, to spill the tea. Thank you for laughing at that. And that includes your tea, that includes other people's tea, no kicking over the tea. So when you get up to get more tea or water or to go to the bathroom, just be mindful of where your feet are. And you can come and go at any time. This is not a public school. You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to ask permission. You don't have to wait for recess. The bathrooms are down the hall to the right, and there's tea and water in the lobby. The structure of the evening will be Charlie and David are going to be in conversation with each other for a little while. And
Yeah.
then we're going to open it up for Q&A in general. And then we are going to go to the lounge where there will be snacks. And you'll never believe this, but if you want, more tea. And we'll all kind of hang there for a little while and have sort of a more informal, relaxed discussion. This is being live streamed. In order for any sound to make it onto the stream, which is up there on the ceiling, it has to go through a microphone. So when you ask your question, someone will bring you this, in fact, exact talking stick to talk into. Don't say your social security number into it because it's going to go onto the internet. So just only share something through the microphone that you're comfortable with. Also, the invisible people from the internet seeing. If you have a question that feels sensitive or that you don't want to go out onto the internet, just don't say it into the mic, and they won't hear it on the internet. Okay. Any questions for me about the space or whether or not you're allowed to spill your tea or anything else? Okay, please join me in welcoming Charlie and David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. This is my first time here. This is an extraordinary space. I'm just amazed by what the team here has been able to create. I have seen this often on videos, and seeing it in person, it's an amazing thing. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy that you're all here. There's a great many of you, some of whom I know well, and some that I will be meeting for the first time. I want to start. I've been in Buddhist centers all my life. No, I've been in Buddhist centers for many decades, and they very often have something like this. And I have never gotten to do this, so I'm going to do this now.
You need the tutorial, or are you prepared? There's a tutorial.
Oh, well, maybe you should come and give me the tutorial.
I'm going to show you just because it makes a horrible noise.
Please, if I do it wrong, okay.
Our goal here is no one has a bad time ever.
Excellent.
Just kidding. But so what you want to do is you want to hit it at an angle like that. Like you want to contact it that way.
Right.
If you do this, good Lord.
Okay.
Then it's a real obstacle is the path time over there. So
Thank you.
Okay.
We're going to be talking about yidam tonight, and one of the yidams is called
Vajrasattva.
no,
Um,
the one with the club, Vajra something. Anyway,
Vajrakilaya.
no, the first yidam, actually, so. Buddhist iconography came from Greece. This is a surprising thing. It's the kingdom of Gantara, which was invaded by Alexander the Great, who established a Greek colony there. And Buddhist art is all descended from Greek art forms. And the first yidam is actually Hercules. And Hercules holds a club like this. And the first Yidam, whose name I certainly should remember,
Vajrapani.
Vajrapani. Yes, thank you very much.
He's the Buddha warrior, right?
Yeah, he's the
Buddha's
protector.
warrior's attendant.
Yeah, he's the
right.
protector of the
Right.
first protector of Shakyamuni Buddha. So this is very like the club that he holds, which I'm now going to make a nasty noise with.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Everything dissolves into emptiness. Oops. It dissolves into emptiness if you're more apt than I am. So we're going to be starting out by talking about Yidam. We would like this to be interactive. If you have questions as we go along that are relevant to what we're saying, put your hand up and Emily will bring the microphone to you and you can ask the question and we'll answer immediately. And when we'll blather for some amount of time, Charlie probably will tell me to shut up at some point because I can go on forever. And then we'll just open it to discussion of any topic that you're interested in. Apparently, some people here have read some of my stuff and may have questions about that, even if it's not about Vajrayana. I think we can accept such questions as well. Charlie's been teaching this material for 20 years and can speak without notes, but I have my iPad because that's the modern way of doing things and I need an outline. But we're starting with Yidam because it is the core practice of Tantra, which is the main piece of Vajrayana. Dzogchen is the other piece. Yidam is the practice that you do first and that you probably do the most of.
Can I interrupt?
Please do.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether it might be a nice idea to get a read of the room and see how many of you are familiar with Yidam practice, how many of you are here because you're interested but haven't experienced it, or we spoke earlier about maybe doing that. So who is practicing Yidam?
Ooh, quite a few.
Who has not any familiarity with Yidam practice? What even is this? Or, yeah, quite a few. Yeah, thank you for being here. That's very brave. It's courageous. Yeah.
And who's curious
Yeah.
but hasn't begun the practice and isn't sure maybe they want to do it or maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Quite a
that's the
few.
largest number.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
So,
Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's it's really helpful to have a sense. So, your first question may be, so what does this word even mean? It's often translated as meditational deity, which isn't exactly accurate, but it's close enough to get a starting sense. A Yidam is a person who you can take as an ideal of intention and action. And this is just me, but I take the Yidams as being imaginary, and an imaginary person may be easier to regard as an ideal than an actual person, because actual people have human foibles. There is another practice, which is taking an actual person as an ideal. That is your guru. And that has some well-known drawbacks. Taking an imaginary person as an ideal also has drawbacks, because they can't like actually do anything. But it's a different set of drawbacks.
So I'm wanting to pick up on your use of the word imaginary.
Mm-hmm.
And so often in context of Yidam and Yidam practice, the imagination is talked about, and there's this sense that one is engaging the imagination. I think we've got to be really careful with that idea and with the use of that word. It's not that it's not true, and it's also that using the word imagination, using the imaginal, it has so many meanings and connotations in our culture, psychological meanings and connotations, that having some other words to bring in there could be really useful at this point, like mythical.
Mm.
You know, as soon as we say, well, oh, it's a practice of mythos, and we're engaging with a mythical being, something different happens, right? Something different in the understanding of what this possibility might be. So, and you have used the word mythical quite a bit recently.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
interesting, because I've recently been writing about the mythical mode of understanding and being as a distinctive mode that is highly functional.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I understand this that well yet, but I think we'll come back to that point about the particular sense of imagination, and how there can be a misunderstanding there.
Mm. Yeah, carry on.
So that's something I will want to
Right, that
think
we can
about,
kind of pick apart a little bit.
the mythical as a way of relating to it.
Right.
Traditionally, the E word is used. We don't tend to use the enlightenment. We don't like the E word so much, because different schools of Buddhism have different stories about what enlightenment means. But normally a Yidam is described as an enlightened being, and you're relating to the Yidam in a way such that you also may become an enlightened being. And so they need to be enlightened in order for you to become enlightened through the practice. So often we talk about Yidam practice as a singular term. I don't know why, because it's a very varied set of quite different practices. My notes say that you now step in and talked about the different kinds of Yidam practice.
There are many different Yidams.
People, imaginary people,
I wouldn't
mythical
call them people. I mean,
mythical beings.
Beings, yeah. Some of them look not dissimilar to human form. Some of them look radically, radically different to any kind of human, understood human form. So a whole range of Yidam forms or beings. And there are different methods, there are different kinds of Yidam practice as well. So when we're talking about difference, there's the different beings, the different practices. You could categorize Yidam practice. I don't know how you might categorize it. One of the ways that I think of as being significantly different is whether the visualization of the Yidam is external, is in front of you or above you, or whether the experience of the Yidam is embodied. That would be called self-arising. This is one of the main distinctions. With an external form, you are usually putting quite a bit of energy, like quite a lot of your practice is in conjuring up the experience of a visual presence and a felt sense of a presence that is here outside of you. And so there are various different methods that can facilitate that. There are a lot of ways that recitation or gradual building or moving into a felt sense. There are lots of different ways according to Buddhist vehicle, jhana, that will facilitate the experience of the Yidam. Does that kind of coincide with what your understanding of different practices might involve?
I would mention that the word visualization is used. It might be somewhat misleading because it is proprioceptive and emotional and energetic and perceptual. So in an external visualization, you're perceiving the Yidam, the deity, and their environment. If you're arising as the Yidam, then you're seeing the world as they see it. So a Buddha has a radically different way of seeing than our default mode of perception. I think there's also a lot of supports for the practice. You can just go straight to the visualization, but typically there's a mantra, and typically you count the mantra on a rosary, a mala, a tenga. There is often mudras, which are particular hand gestures. There are, you can adopt the physical stance or positioning of the Yidam. They're always shown in a particular posture, that's the word. And that actually, because it's a proprioceptive practice, actually adopting the posture of the Yidam can be quite powerful. Most often nowadays when Yidam is presented, there's a text called a sadhana, which is a long thing. It might take you, and the practice is to read the text out. And that might take a long time. It could be anything from 10 minutes to an hour or more. The text is describing what the practice is. So if you understand the practice, you do the practice as you go along in the text. There is a tendency to substitute the reading of the text for the practice. And I make the analogy that this is like your washing machine isn't working. And so you sit in front of the washing machine and you bow to the washing machine and you take the text out and you take the manual, maybe even the repair manual for the washing machine out, and you read that out loud, expecting that somehow this is going to stop the washing machine from making this awful screeching sound, which might not be as effective as you hoped. That's a distortion, but this is a very common mistake that gets made.
I want to pick up on some things
Yes, please.
that you're saying there. So, and I am going to I'm going to relate to what you've been saying with a particular kind of terminology or a particular way of thinking about it. So I hear you describing Yidam practice and different forms of Yidam practice. And what I pick up on is in every method, doesn't matter what the vehicle, doesn't matter what the particular function is, something that is similar across methods is that every single aspect of your being is engaged, every sense field, your concept included, your concept sense field, your body, your visual field, internal, external, whatever, your everything in your experience is fully engaged such that you're building energy. It doesn't matter whether you're practicing the external form or the self-arising. There is a lot of energy in Yidam practice, a lot. And it is that experience of the energetic quality of relating to the Yidam that is the way that the practice functions. That is what begins to make change, that causes something electric to happen in the experience. And you and I were talking about this earlier, and one of the words that came up was electric. Right? The quality of the experience of the practice has that. It's exciting. It's really exciting.
Yeah. We could talk about what the practice is like. It can be ecstatic.
It can be blissful.
Yes. So, traditionally, it's said to be the experience of the union of bliss, clarity, and emptiness. And this is kind of dull, but it is ecstatic, and it is an experience of clarity, of vision, and of understanding, and an experience of non-separateness of self and whatever you're perceiving, and you're perceiving in this non-ordinary way as the Yidam perceives. So all of that together is the simultaneous experience of those things. It's transformative.
Right. And the overall function of that is transformation, because it's
Yes.
Buddhist Tantra. And so within that, you have various forms of transformation. Like transformation isn't one thing. There's purification. That's a very different kind of transformative experience to was another form of transformation. Experiencing the whole stuff of your being liberated in the sense of like a freedom. That's a very different kind of transformation as well. There's a sense of fluid interaction in the world. That is a result of Yidam practice. There's devotion is another result. So different ways of engaging can lead to these very different results. It functions in somewhat of a different way, and yet it's transformative.
Maybe Evolving Ground is the Vajrayana meditation community that Charlie co-founded and leads. Maybe you could talk briefly about the specific Yidam practices that are available there.
Right.
And how they differ and what their particular functions are.
Right. So just to differentiate, there Evolving Ground is a very loose community. There are many people involved who are practicing Yidam with different lineages or in different traditions, and who might have their own Yidam practice or be practicing with a non-Evolving Ground group, community, Sangha. In Evolving Ground, we're bringing some Yidam forms into being that are what you might call a contemporary form. And the main characteristics of that is they're from the perspective of Anu Yoga, which is, or Dzogchen moving through Anu Yoga. So they are self-arising. Not all of them, actually. We have some different forms, but they're also fairly short envisionment practices. So rather than having a lot of build-up of visualization, they're quite pithy. They're in English. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll introduce an Avalokitesvara practice, and that is a fairly short English description of Avalokitesvara that is supposed to be inspiring, poetic, and facilitate the felt experience and the visualization of the Yidam. So we have several. We have purification, Vajrasattva purification now, and a Vajrasattva self-arising. Have a Avalokitesvara.
Purification sounds a bit holy.
It does. Yeah.
Could you speak about what the function of that practice is? Why one might want to do it?
Yes, right. That's a good point. So Vajrasattva is one of the tantric nundro preparation practices, and purification in that context is, you could think of it as being like clearing the decks. Getting yourself into a position in which you are fully open, ready to engage with tantric method. And the purification practice in this particular context, it's about clearing regret. So if you have a particular event or a happening or a memory or a set of circumstances that you feel really regretful about, or that just kind of niggling you, or you're ruminating on, or whatever it is, the practice functions so as you can move through that experience again and again and again and have that drop away. Reach a point of simply being fresh and clean and open without that sense of interference in being present. So it's like a kind of clearing of regret, of, in a traditional terminology, you might say past karma. Yeah.
And Avalokitesvara. What is the function of Avalokitesvara?
To experience the world as compassion. Yeah. So Avalokitesvara is Chenrezig in Tibetan, and Avalokitesvara hears the suffering, hears the cries, the laments of the world, and is in immediate connection. There's total warmth, love, connection, and compassion for the suffering of the nature of suffering in the world. And the practice of Avalokitesvara's Yidam practice makes it possible that you can experience that in any moment, that you can be in connection with that and be powerful in that, be powerful to be present and make change. So you could say Vajrasattva practice is arising as clear, clean clarity, clarity and bliss in communication, and Avalokitesvara is arising as compassion in communication. A way of understanding, and I know how you would add to this, a way of understanding tantric practice, or all of Vajrayana actually, is finding communication, finding spontaneous, responsive communication to whatever is arising in the moment. And Yidam practice leads into that experience. It's a way of accessing that experience.
Historically, Tantra developed gradually out of late Mahayana. In late Mahayana, there is the last development of Mahayana was what was called Tathagatagarbha theory, which is the Tathagatagarbha is sometimes translated as Buddha nature, but it is the seed of enlightenment. And the doctrine is that we each have within us the seed of enlightenment that has the potential that we can all potentially be Buddhas. And in late Mahayana, they didn't have a good explanation for how that seed is going to sprout. They actually, the scriptures say this takes 10,000 eons for you to attain enlightenment by nurturing this seed. And that, I don't know, 10,000 eons seems like a long time to wait to be enlightened, and can't we speed this up a bit? So they wanted to, there's like, as an engineer, Tantra appeals to me because it's about getting results, and it's about becoming effective in the real world. And so how they were wondering, do we make this seed sprout? And they thought, well, there are these celestial Buddhas who were already theorized in late Mahayana. We need their help and guidance. And so we will, visualize these Buddhas or celestial bodhisattvas and receive blessings from them. So that was nice. They were receiving blessings, and that felt good, but it didn't seem to quite be the thing. And so they added more method. Engineering is about method. And so that they thought, well, we need some methods here. And there's a lot of the ritual methods that were added to this visualization. And this is where this fronterizing comes from. And then somebody had the bright idea, well, actually, the point here is to be a Buddha. We want this seed to sprout and send up a shoot, and then the flower opens, and then there's the fruit. How do we make that happen? Well, we've been visualizing these celestial bodhisattvas, and that's nice, but maybe we want to be Buddhas too, so we can have that Buddha enter ourselves, and we can find ourselves being that Buddha. And this is the origin of the practice of of Yidam.
So why? Why
What-
did that happen when it happened? Like, do you think that it was doctrinally led? Like, oh, there's this problem here in the scripture, in the
I think there's some of that, but I think you have another theory.
I do, but it's
Yes.
just a theory, and
Yep.
I've taught possibly some people here have heard me wonder about this before, but I wonder whether there were social circumstances such that it became necessary to relate to the world in a different way.
Yeah.
And in a less general, less uniform way. I mean, Tantra happened, it came into being at a time of conflict and strife and really politically challenging time. And so I wonder whether because of that, there was just this urgency, this immediacy, we've got to, something has to happen. And I make a lot of parallels now with contemporary culture. Like, why are we even talking about Yidam here tonight? Like, why would it be relevant to us in this melting pot of cultural difference and cultural circumstances that we have? I think one of the ways that it came about, and again, it's theoretical, I don't, it's working from first principles here, but I think that there was just this demand for a kind of interpersonal technology, doesn't seem quite right, but effect in interaction, in social circumstances, and large group interaction as well. Yeah.
Well, there is historical support for this idea in as much as the Gupta Empire,
Right.
which had supported Buddhism as a period of peace and prosperity, collapsed due to barbarian invasions. And suddenly it became urgent to actually do something instead of waiting around for 100,000 eons. A very similar interesting thing happened in the 1950s in Tibet, that the whole thing had kind of degenerated into rote performance, and some people realized that the world is ending. We're about to be invaded by China, and we can't go on. There's no point in going through the motions. We have to actually do the real practice. And there was a dramatic change in the tenor of the practice at that point, where it became visceral. Like, if we're going to do this, we need to do it now, because it's all going to be over in a few years.
I'm reminded of there's a story.
It's Khenpo Gamchar.
That's what I'm thinking.
Right.
Tell that story. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was one of the important gurus of the lineage, some of the lineages which we have participated in. He was a sort of scholastic, rote practitioner of very learned and very respected.
He was an abbot of a monastery, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Kenpo means professor, roughly. And he got wind of the first Chinese invasion, which was 51 or 52 before it happened. And there's several prominent lamas have told this story because they were there. He showed up one day, and he was reeking of alcohol, and he had two prostitutes, one under each arm, and he said, "Right, now we are going to do Tantra the way that it says in the scriptures, which is highly transgressive. And everybody take your clothes off." And there was, just this utter shock, because, nobody in Tibet had done what the scriptures say for hundreds of years. I mean, it made an enormous impression, and that was the inspiration for a lot of the lamas who came to the West. There's a sense of urgency that they had, which is this whole thing could be over completely very soon. And I think this is an urgency that we have felt also, that we are heirs to this tradition that is very meaningful for us and very important, that could easily die out. And going through the motions the way that the Tibetans have tended to do that's not going to do anything.
And I think we can make a parallel with our contemporary times. We, in a sense, there's political urgency, there's climate urgency, there's so much that is potentially catastrophic right now. And we cannot simply go through the motions that we have been going through for decades, for centuries. It's not working. And what do you do with that? How do you relate to that? And the parallel in that experience that they had in Tibet there was you cannot reject, you cannot distance yourself from that which is really uncomfortable, really difficult to deal with. You cannot morally separate yourself from the bad stuff. We have to actually get on in there, get our hands dirty, engage with it, be willing to put ourselves really on the line. And it feels transgressive. It feels like you're stepping into this really unknown, frightening, actually really terrifying, unknown experience. And it's very real. And that is tantric practice. That is what tantric practice is. It's engaging with that which is discomforting, disquieting, really challenging. You can think about that in an individual way, in a social way, a cultural way. Like you welcome the hardest bit, the nasty stuff. Yeah. I can see some of you grinning. Yes. Alex. Yeah.
Repeat my question into the mic.
Okay.
Can you give an example?
I'll repeat the question, yeah.
Yeah. Can you give an example of the nasty stuff? Of the really hard stuff? What's that like?
Right. What is an example of the nasty stuff? More traditionally in the practices that we're inheriting, that would usually be assumed to be negative emotion. It doesn't have to be, and that is a very particular phrasing, right? Negative emotion, but emotional experience that is turbulent, disruptive, all-consuming. Any experience in our physical embodied being that is perceived as undesirable, unwanted, challenging. And then you can extend that into social experience as well. Any social interaction that could be really habitually constrained. You don't reject so much as discover the spaciousness within that such that it can be reconstituted. Could you add to that? I mean, I'm thinking about relating this to our political contemporary circumstances as well.
Yeah, but I think it also can just be, some sort of awful interaction you have at work with your boss or your coworkers, or a difficulty in your marriage, any kind of nastiness is fuel for Tantra,
Right.
traditionally said to be.
I like to think of it in terms of patterns, because there are always patterns. So it's the relationship with pattern such that it becomes non-habitually constrained. Yidam practice is a way into that experience. There are many other tantric methods that are way into experiencing the way that we have patterned ourselves in relation to each other as opportunities for something totally, completely different, utterly unimagined even. And when it clicks and you have that experience, it's like it is experiencing you. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Yeah. And that is the same with Yidam practice as well. There's almost like the experience that I've had practicing Yidam, most Yidams, there's a sort of turning point, and it's like, something comes online and the Yidam has you. It's like you are being practiced almost. It's like a switch flipping or whatever. I don't think it's like that for everybody. Some people have that experience. It suddenly happens. Others, it's
more gradual for me.
Gradual. It's more gradual for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that?
Well, when I first started doing the practice, I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. I didn't get good instructions. I was trying to imagine what this practice was supposed to be, and I was like, is it this or is it this? And I'm, I had the mantra, and so I was, dutifully counting my mantra and saying the mantra under my breath, and like, what's that supposed to be for? And nothing is happening, and like I asked questions on, is it like this or is it like this? And the answers weren't really very helpful. So I just kind of kept at it. And at a certain point, the visualization started to happen, not very clearly, and then it grew. So yeah, for me it was quite gradual, and I'm a lousy practitioner, so sometimes for me it's very clear and intense and straightforward, and sometimes it's like, what am I even doing here? This is boring. And we've been going for nearly an hour. I have an outline because, I'm a boring, stiff person, where, Charlie can riff like jazz. So I have questions, which is, so there's sections in the outline for what Yidam practice is not. These are common misunderstandings. There is the topic of how does Yidam work in terms of its radical alienness.
Oh yeah, that's important.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I was going to say, we've been going for most of an hour, and I can blah, blah, blah all night, but let's do the things that you think are important. And then the other things are things you could ask questions about. I'll just mention topics. Is Yidam practice necessary for Vajrayana? A lot of people really resisted it, and I sure resisted it for years. I did not want to do this practice. And is there something else I could do? So is it necessary? The answer is no, but you probably, it's probably what you want to do. And there's a related question, which is empowerment necessary? Empowerment is a ritual that traditionally you have to attend and participate in before you're allowed to begin the practice of Yidam. And people often say, well, why do I have to do that? It's magic. well, I don't believe in magic, so I don't want to do this thing because I don't want anything to do with magic and I don't want to have an empowerment. And can't you just give me the practice? Because the practice must be the important thing. And the practice, you just do the practice and then the practice works. You don't need the empowerment. Well, is that right? We could address that question.
Who's been to an empowerment awang? Yeah.
Oh, not very
a few
many.
people,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's such a, I think there are more people who are practicing Yidam. Who's
Yeah.
practicing Yidam who has not been officially empowered? Yeah, several. Okay, great. It is not true you have to have an empowerment, but there's a lot to say about why you might want to anyway.
It can mean different things as well. The word empowerment, so there's the ritual, group, formal, structured one empowerment, but it can also mean transmission in a very small setting. Maria.
Maybe you could explain the term transmission.
Right. Yeah. Transmission is this is one way of explaining it, and there are multiple ways. It's the passing of understanding from one generation to another, experiential understanding. It's the giving and receiving of something differently possible from one person to another person. It's the way that lineage continues. It's continuity of liberated, different experience. How would you describe it?
Well, I would say that.
Yeah, I would say that something's communicated through the presence of another person.
Communication. It's communication.
There's
yeah.
something in there in the presence, in the time and the place you're with them. Like you just come to understand something. But I know I've had some of my most profound experiences of transmission weren't like in formal ceremonies. They were just on retreats where we were practicing together and something happened.
Yeah.
And those memories are so profound that I can return to them. And there's a felt sense or a felt memory like in my body of that something. And I can connect that to certain symbols or certain deities. So,
because
something has to light the spark. You know, you could have a dream or a vision or being with a teacher, but somehow the spark has to get lit, and that's a mysterious, magical process.
Because Tantra is about relationship and communication, group practice it's traditionally a group practice. One can practice it by oneself, but traditionally it is a group practice, and it is very much potentiated by practicing with other people.
The whole point of a formal empowerment is to create the atmosphere in which something really unusual and different can happen. So you've got a lot of instruments, music, sound. The whole of the experience is orchestrated. It's very tantric, like orchestrating circumstances, making stuff happen. That's the nature of empowerment. Like there's a lot of effort, there's a lot of energy. There's it can take ages to set up an empowerment, and and then everybody in that experience is so engaged. It's so full on. It's the the immersive experience itself is what makes it possible for some kind of different perception, I would say, some sort of unusual perception to occur, like what you were talking about, Marie. Yeah.
Maybe you could address relatedly this alienness as key to the function of Tantra, and then we could open out to general questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. There's this phrase I like to use, stepping into. And Yidam practice is stepping into a different experience. It's stepping into the experience of the Yidam, stepping into the world of the Yidam, the view of the Yidam. And when you step into something, you're moving externally, right? You're moving into something different. This is a particular way of viewing it that is it's a little bit different to most descriptions of what Yidam practice is, because I think usually we talk about it through the language of our psychological heritage and our cultural heritage, which is about what is happening internally. And it's not wrong. It's not wrong that change occurs internally or for us as individuals. But what I want to emphasize and what I like to bring into the mix as well is that what is changing is what is happening in the space of interaction, what is happening between people, what is happening in my response and my engagement with others. And for that to change, there has to be some sense of the way that the direction that you are looking is outward more than it is inward. When you practice Yidam, you are changing the way that you are looking outward. And the emphasis is on the outward, not on the everything that is happening to me. Because it's very easy to get caught up in a kind of narrative about what is going on in terms of state. And we like to focus and remain with state and state change. And it's not that that is wrong. It's like, yeah, that happens. But it can be really valuable to understand transformation and change in terms of stepping into something completely unknown yet, something new, something in the future, something different that is available here, and being open to that external change. It's just a slightly different kind of way of looking at it that can be helpful sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one of the stopping points for a lot of people is the sense that the Yidams are radically alien and like, they've got 6 arms and I don't have 6 arms. How can I even relate to that? I mean, this is, I don't want to have 6 arms. These 2 are the ones I've got, and that's the real thing. And people say, well, can't I make up my own Yidam and practice that? And the answer is no, you can't do that. That won't work. And that is not because some authority figure says, no, you are not qualified to invent a Yidam. It doesn't work because it's going to be coming from your own psychology if you make it up. And the point is to accomplish a radical transformation. And that means stepping into something that is outside of your current experience in order to open new possibilities that are radically different. And having, experiencing yourself as having 6 arms, which you can do, you suddenly realize that things, ways of being are possible that are very unlike anything that you thought was.
But, I think there's a sweet spot. It's like there's and that it doesn't have to be necessarily literal. So what we're talking about is a change of attitude such that you are open to stepping into a structure that is provided externally. And it could be that six-armed Heruka is simply not gonna have that connection for you, and that's why there are many yidams.
Yeah.
There are, you can think about them in terms of quality or characteristics or very different forms. If you take the principle of the practice, it is not the form, the visual form, the tanka form that is the most important thing here at all. And it may have been in original context. It may have been because that would have been such a colorful, evocative, extraordinary affront to the sense fields. The way that a wrathful appearance would have been experienced in the original context would have been unbelievably different to what is available to us now. I mean, we've been assaulted with all kinds of media and visual possibilities and imaginal, fantastical, possible ways of seeing the world that it's very, very difficult for us to imagine what it might have been like, I think, originally to walk into a monastery that's absolutely full of these images. It would have just been a blast to the sense fields in the way that we can't really access that same sort of experience now, because we just live in a different cultural experience. So it's not necessarily the visual that is going to give rise to that radical differentness, but maybe some kind of change of attitude. Some sort of some
The difference that you're meaning by alien.
yes.
The term alien that you're using that as alien to an individual, enough of a difference
It's
from
the
them
differentness,
that
yeah,
in their union with it causes
I think
change.
so. Exactly that. Yeah. And it's that the differentness is not self-conceived. It's provided externally.
Right. So we've been going for an hour. Maybe
Right.
It is time for questions. Yes.
How much daylight do you see between Tantra of India, Tantra of like non-dual Kashmiri Shaivism, and Vajrayana? And I feel like we sort of coming to things as Buddhists, we in a way inherit the Tibetan traditions and cultural context in Tibet. How much of that is part of your particular group? And my second sort of related question is there room in current sort of more modern Vajrayana for stages that would involve, more exoteric teachings and then adept stages?
Thank you, sir. I want to check that I've understood your question as you intend it. The first is, how much room in the community in Evolving Ground, in our Sangha, is there for stages, yeah. We have this conversation all the time. We've been having this conversation in different ways for several years now, and even in the history of Tibetan Buddhism, in the history of especially Dzogchen, in relation to other vehicles, other styles of Buddhism, there is this tension between developmental change and spontaneous, revelatory, instantaneous change. And that tension is how it's going to be. It's going to be like that I think, in your individual practice. Sometimes you might be going, and you notice retrospectively, oh, there's been change. Other times you might be stepping through very clearly defined steps. When I've done this, I'll be then I'll be going on to that. Then I'll be going on to that. And there's going to be moments of unexpected, visceral, sudden somethingness and those two ways of changing how we are simply exist together, I think. I don't think one is right, or one view is right, another view is, it has to be one way or the other, whatever is most available. And in Evolving Ground, we approach from the understanding of the view of Dzogchen. So everything has that kind of flavor of, it is possible to have rapid, different experience. And as we increase the number of practices and as we have different sets of methods happening, we're also building different structures and stepping stones. I tend to like to think of it as being more like a network of nodes, and there's no clearly defined, everybody has to start at this point and everybody then moves on to the next point, but more like we're facilitating individual and group journeys through these different possible experiences, and where you start and where you move on to could be different according to your personal circumstances.
I didn't fully understand your question. Did that actually relate to what you asked? Great. Yeah, that's what I was missing. Yes. Could you? Do you want to ask more about that?
So, I've heard that the rituals and much of the structure of the canon and the curriculum is quite similar, but it seems like, because there's such a difference in geography and somewhat in time, that there would be differences. And of course, Vajrayana is a Buddhist practice. So how much, how do you think that plays out in a modern context and what you are seeking to teach now?
It's a little difficult to answer because neither of us knows very much about Kashmiri Shaivism. Historically, it seems that Tantra in Buddhism was not originally called Tantra. I talked about this early phase of what we now call Tantra as emulating the celestial Buddhas. And it appears historically that at some point, some Buddhists learned about Hindu Tantra and incorporated a lot of the methods into Buddhism. This was the stage at which the whole thing became transgressive, which it wasn't up until that point. So there's a kind of break point around 700. And in terms of the Tantric yanas, this occurs, you start to get it in what's called Yoga Tantra, and then Mahayoga Tantra is the super transgressive one. My understanding is that a lot of the details of the practice, as it was practiced back then, were very similar, but the view, the understanding is is Buddhist instead of Hindu, and therefore actually quite different. So, for example, I may be radically distorting this because I don't know Hinduism, but the Hindu gods are primarily taken as actually existing independent entities, where in scriptural Buddhism, and I think a lot of Buddhists do relate to them this way too, but in the scriptures it says, no, these, like everything else, are empty, and they are empty and have form, as we do also. And this gives the whole thing a very different flavor, I think.
So a little bit of a follow-on question from earlier. I'm like you, I'm very resistant to all these. Also, you didn't use the D word a lot.
Which is
Oh,
that?
deity.
Deity.
Deity,
You're
yeah.
saying yidam. It's
Yeah.
like, what the hell? Oh, deity practice. So I'm very
Yeah.
resistant to all this
Yeah.
practice. Running almost like a running joke with my teacher, where I'll just literally, oh, we're doing that now. I'm leaving the room. But is there? And I know there's like so the what I flow with is whatever practice resonates with me, what I'm drawn to. That's what I'm going to do. I have limited time. I don't have 10,000 eons. And so that's been my sort of way of navigating these practices, whatever is most alive. That said, I'm an engineer, and sometimes we can fall into little habits. And it's like, no, sometimes you need to do something different, introduce some entropy, which essentially this is really what a lot of it is, right? It's an entropy practice to break everything up and try something different. So would you say there are, if you were trying to prescribe a practice, like, oh, you could try this or you could try that, are there any indications of where someone might be in that practice hitting a wall or something where you would say, you know what, you really should try this for a little bit? My practice mostly is like Dzogchen right now. So any symptoms?
That's such a great question.
Yeah. Well, I think Charlie is much more qualified to answer this than I am. But so I was practicing meditation pretty seriously for a few years, and a teacher took me aside and said, I think it's time for you to start Tantra. And I said, what's that? And they sort of gave a capsule description. I was like, no. No.
What was the no?
What was the no?
Why were you no?
Because it's gods and demons and magic, and I don't believe in any of that stuff. I had and still have a basically, mainstream scientific materialist worldview.
Belief does not apply.
Well, yes. So, I didn't have a good understanding of this, but then I, through exposure in the meditation center, I saw more of this, and I was like, no. I had a list at one point of things that I would absolutely never do because I'd probably like them, and that would be extremely bad. So there was hang gliding, there was cocaine, and there was Vajrayana. And I still haven't hang glided. I still haven't tried cocaine. But apparently, here I am sitting in front of you pretending to teach Vajrayana. What the heck? So, the attraction eventually overcame the resistance. So what did the teacher see in me such that, I think maybe they just saw that I was very serious about meditation. But also there's, I'm guessing based on things that other teachers have said, and maybe Charlie can rescue me, but I think a student has a certain kind of spark where I'm sorry. I don't want to, I have to be careful. There is a possible wrong way of practicing meditation that leads you, that becomes nihilistic and leads you into a kind of anesthetized dissociation, depersonalization, derealization experience. And a lot of people go down that path. Maybe Tantra could rescue you from that path. But if a student is actively wanting to go in that direction, which a lot of people do, then Tantra is going to be not what they want. Where if a student is enthusiastic about the liveness of experience that that arises as a consequence of meditation, then that might be a sign that Tantra is going to be the right path for them.
I'm hearing your question as being to what extent and how do I know whether or not to do something that doesn't appeal? Yeah. Why do you practice? What's the what's your motivation?
Oh, standard thing. Awakening and liberation, more freedom, less suffering and more freedom in experiencing the world, and then through that deeper connection with this wondrous being. And I feel like that's happening.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. And I'm not going towards the comfy, cozy cocoon of the sort of, absorbed state. But something tells me that right now I need that to get deep into that, like either into jhana or into cessation or something, versus the other way, the more aliveness, because I feel like the aliveness is there. But I could just have a blind spot, and that's the tricky thing. I'm not resisting these practices because it's magic or it's crazy woo-woo, because I've gone completely crazy and woo-woo always last. I use the word vibe now. All these things I would have slapped myself at 5 years ago, but I'm like, and that's come through, exposure to psychedelics and shamanic work and stuff. So I'm open to all this stuff, but it's just, where's that resistance? And what am I not getting by not doing this? So,
yeah. I mean, I feel like the more that you practice, the more that what you're practicing is a kind of self-calibration in relation to mentoring and other inputs as well. So it's not like we are not in circumstances whereby it would be really valuable to 100% give up your autonomy to what somebody else is telling you to do, and just simply step into a system and like, okay, I'll do that. Works for some people, but for most people in our culture, that is not really a viable, workable option. And there's always going to be some kind of intelligent recalibration according to what your circumstances are, what works, what doesn't work. Something isn't quite working in the way that it's supposed to work. That is the point at which you're like, okay, right, well, what's happening here? Who do I go talk to about this? What else is possible? So long as you know how a practice is supposed to function, like what is the principle, the mechanism by which it exists and does its thing, and then how is it supposed to function? What am I supposed to see? Then you've got something to calibrate around, and there are a lot of people to talk with about how to do that and what's going to work or whatever, or what else might be a good practice at a particular time. That, yeah.
Mark, I apologize. I addressed part of my answer to someone else because I'm wearing my reading glasses and can't actually see anybody very clearly. I brought the reading glasses so that I could see my iPad.
No, that was great.
Since you brought it up, could you speak some more about the Guru Yoga side of things? Since you brought it up, could you speak a little bit more about the Guru Yoga side of things, Lama Naljor, that kind of stuff? Why would one work with a guru, or also why would one not?
I get the hard questions. This is not a practice that you're likely to be able to do on your own based on reading. It is so hang gliding. You could read books about hang gliding, and you could buy yourself a hang glider, and you can jump off a cliff, and that might not go very well. There's a lot of I haven't hang glided. It's still on my list of things that I won't do because I'd probably like it. There's a lot of subtle embodied technique that you need an instructor for. There has come to be a dichotomized misunderstanding of the student-teacher relationship. You call it the learning relationship. The learning relationship, there is the guru model. There was a very wide variety of different learning relationships available in Tibet. There's a particular absolutist model that actually comes more from Neo-Advaita than elsewhere, that has failed spectacularly in the West in the past several decades. I think it probably has worked very well for some people also, but it's discredited and doesn't seem to function well. I don't know whether it really... my reading of the anthropology of Tibetan Buddhism says that's not really how things ever worked either. So I think interacting with a teacher who knows how the thing is done and can give you personalized feedback and demonstrate is invaluable. It's really critical, but that doesn't have to have any particular institutional form. And a lot of the authoritarian hierarchy, which is very much, it's a lot more complicated in Tibet than it's made out to be, but we don't need that. It doesn't function here. So, meditation teachers are a thing, and you have, you can go to many different meditation teachers, but most people eventually find that relating with a particular teacher primarily is helpful. And that's, I think, more true for Tantra because the instructions have to be personal, because it's a very diverse complex and individualized set of practices that everybody has to do somewhat differently, and having a personal guidance is really helpful.
Have you practiced Guru Yoga, Sam?
In the Bon Nundra I'm doing, it opens up with the Lama Naldra.
Mhm.
It's now starting to bear some interesting fruit. At the same time, my personality is kind of set up against it. I mean, I'm a classic Gen Xer. I raised myself. My parents were mostly absent. When I needed help, that was the one time you don't get it. If you ask for help, you're not going to get it. So in my life, that's my experience. So getting it all out of books and experience and talking to the rest of the resources there that are not human has had to been my path. And I've tried to find the Vajra relationship with a number of teachers. That wasn't there, whether it was on me or somebody else, hard to know. But all I know is it doesn't seem to I don't seem to have a place for it in my psyche. Trusting a human that much is, I don't know if it's impossible. I have never met a human who can inspire that level of trust. I've met many other beings who can demonstrate that level of trust and invariance, and so I work with them. But humans, I just don't expect it from. Never found one who did.
Yeah.
So
the Lama Naldra practice, although it's, I mean, I don't know how the one that you're practicing works. It's meant to inspire devotion to your personal human guru in part, but it is also relating to the lineage and to the non-human bearers of the lineage. So very often, Lama Naldra is Tibetan for Guru Yoga, which is a practice of devotion, and it's devotion to the Lama, the Yidam, and the Dakini or Daka. This is, but the Yidam and maybe the Dakini or Daka are not human. I think Vajra, Vajra relationship as theorized really doesn't seem to function very well for many Westerners for lots of reasons. And part of the reason for the founding of Evolving Ground is that it's finding alternative methods of structuring learning relationships such that Vajra relationship is not the mode, and yet there is a form of teaching relationship and learning relationship that is powerful and effective.
For some people.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. In a more, in some traditional contexts, the way that Guru Yoga is presented is simply that at a certain point you've done sets of practices, you have a certain amount of contact with a teacher, and they just say, "Oh, now you practice Guru Yoga," or usually it's the teacher of your teacher who says to you, "Oh, you should practice Guru Yoga now with your teacher," and it is a formalized, structured practice that is given. So it's a practice that you then start to engage with, and sometimes it may be connected with a particular yidam, and you're practicing seeing your real life teacher as a yidam, as the yidam. It comes in lots of different forms. Why did you want to ask that question? Like, is there What's
constitutes
interesting
an
about the
impediment
question?
for
Yeah.
me, since I find myself not well disposed or congenial to it. And I've been advised, go around and just go figure out another way to do it. And so that's been my attitude. Even though I'm working with this Bon Lama, even doing the Lama Altra, it's not him that's coming up. But the lineage is starting to come through, which is the first time for me, even like feeling the lineage that way. I mean, particularly amongst humans, it's different. Deity lineages are different. And the deity series that we experience in the Western tradition is a very different kind of thing, and yet similar energy, but a different flavor. And this is now coming through in a different way. It's new and different to me. And some of it's very exciting, but it's not fitting into the same paradigm as what I've been taught as this particular relationship with the guru.
Right.
I'm used to not having to deal with the non-physicals as my educators because they were what was around.
Yeah.
I think one can relate to the human lineage just as people who have put extraordinary effort and creativity into both the continuation and the effulgent innovation throughout history of the development of the practice lineage, and feeling gratitude for the work that they did, and feeling gratitude that, I am heir to this extraordinary thing that they carried on and created and innovated. And, that comes down to, my main teacher, with whom I'm no longer in relationship with, but I still have a lot of respect for. I'm really profoundly grateful to him for what he did for me. And, that sense of Vajra relationship wasn't going to work for me, maybe for the same reasons it didn't work for you. And so at 15 years in, I said, yeah, this actually isn't working. I'm out of this. But when I do practice, there's the experience of receiving the blessing of the lineage. This is a term that sounds like some kind of religious thing, woo or something. And receiving the blessing of the lineage, this is a real thing that you can experience. And I don't know if that's profound. And the Lama Nalgor is not just your current teacher. It is that whole stack, that whole line going back into history and to non-human antecedents. We start with, in the Nyingma tradition, Kunta Zangpo, the primordial Buddha. That's the root of the start of the lineage tree, carrying down through a lot of mythological humans and then increasingly historical humans down to here we are now.
Could you talk about how the metaphysics would have been held traditionally? So like you said, oh, well, emptiness and form, but like, well, like, I don't know, like it definitely in like a bunch of Mahayana and in like some other, I know more about Eastern Vajrayana or something. They'll be like, yeah, no, seriously, these spirits though, they're like totally real. They're like real. And they're like, don't use those words unless you're a Westerner. And then they're like, no, it's real though. And it's like, wait, obviously, like there's a lot more shades of nuance, and like you're talking about it as, nope, it's a visualization, no problem, visualization, who cares? and like we want like more dimensions maybe, or maybe you're like, nah, it just was real. And yeah.
Yeah, there's different strands within Buddhism, and I think people have always related to this in different ways. Some of the late Mahayana sutras say that the celestial Buddhas or celestial bodhisattvas are not subject to the three marks of existence. The three marks of existence, well, so they have real selves that are permanent. We are less real than they are because we are anatman, we don't have real selves, and they are eternal and we are transient, and we suffer and the celestial Buddhas do not know from suffering. There's another strand in Mahayana, which is Madhyamaka, which is the theory of emptiness. And that says everything is empty. The gods are empty. The Buddhas are empty. They are no more real than anything else. And that's not very real. And in Madhyamaka, everything is unreal, non-existent, illusory. Tantra synthesizes a number of different trends such that everything is empty form and everything is real and not real at the same time. And everything is transparent yet vivid, flickering in and out of existence. And this applies to the deities as much as to us. So that is the metaphysics of Tantra. But I think within traditional cultures, that was an elite view that, highly educated people who had studied Madhyamaka, which is this very complex philosophical thing, would take this view. I think nearly everybody actually regarded the deities as concretely existing external entities.
Was it seen as like you are like, if you, okay, I sit down, I'm told to visualize. Yeah, there is a concrete one, but this one is me just visualizing. Or no, I'm meeting the thing.
Yeah, I'm meeting the thing. Yeah. I think that I mean, I don't know for sure, but I have the impression that was the way that it was regarded. Yeah. You read fairly recent teachers' descriptions of their practice or history, and it sounds like that is the way that they are regarding things.
I think there's an interesting sense in which, despite my holding a materialist, scientific-ish kind of worldview, I regard the Yidams as having their own agendas and their own, so there is the sense in meeting the Yidam. It's not fantasy in an ordinary sense. It's
not an archetype. It's often understood using that term, but I think that there's something that doesn't seem quite right about describing Yidam as archetype. Would you agree with
Well,
that?
yeah, I mean, the
Sort
idea of
like-
yidams is that these are
Yeah.
universal human parts of deep human psychology, and the yidams are not that. I mean, because they're radically alien, they are possibilities for humans, but they're not normal parts of psychology. And, you know, I'm against metaphysics, right? I've recently written a bunch of screeds against metaphysics, and I'm going to write some more screeds against metaphysics. You know, if you start asking questions about, well, you know, what is the ontological status of the yidams like? In what sense do they exist or not exist? I don't think that's useful. I think that's kind of an abstract speculation. You do the practice, and you get the result. And
There's some like a certain flavor of contemporary hippie who's like, if you don't construe it as real, it doesn't work.
I think that's wrong.
Can you define real?
No. I mean, that's metaphysics. That's the essence of metaphysics.
I'll go with Plato, so it's easier.
Could you say more about this self-arising version of the yidam practice you mentioned, and how, if at all, the radical alien aspect shows up in it?
Self-arising is connected with Anu Yoga in one of the categorization. Do you are you familiar with Nyingma? So in one of the categorizations, the last path before Dzogchen, which is spontaneous, instantaneous, arising in presence. The last thing before that is self-arising. Self-arising yidam is part of that practice, and so it's so close. It's so close to spontaneous, instantaneous experience of Rigpa or enlightenment. Complete experience that the method is such that there is the minimum viable duality and minimum viable external internal duality. So you simply become there's a little bit of the sense that you step into the energetic experience of being the yidam, and in doing so, the yidam experience, experiences your physical space or whatever, and that is like blasting open a door into the non-dual experience. That's just my way of putting self-arising yidam into words. It's associated with completion stage.
I think you're asking about the alienness.
Yeah.
Is that right? Or am I?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Because the goal state or goal way of being, I would say, rather than state, the goal way of being is not our ordinary way of being. And how do you get out of the habitual patterns of being? You need something that is really different and electric to blow open possibility and
It's experience of subtle body, which is your physical physical being in the world is experienced really differently, and in a way that is loosened up from our usual. Here I am in this physical body, moving around through the world, such that the experience is much more pure sensation. And in that becoming the experience, there's much less sense of here I am a person, and that there is this kind of perspective of from here, and then there's a relational thing happening that is like how we ordinarily are, where you can experience yourself as simply not being physical in the same way. It's just like pure sensation. It's very weird. It's there's a there's a lot of light in self-arising and in the way that self-arising yidam is spoken about, and that's because you can actually have some experience that feels like that everything is just light and sound and sensation. It's not so clearly put into this box of here's the physical bit and here's the sound bit and here's which is what we usually are like.
And having 6 arms and being bright green is a step into weirdness. And the yidams are dissimilar to, say, the Greek gods in that they are made of light. And when you experience yourself as the yidam, you experience yourself as a body of light that is luminous and semi-transparent. And if you're bright green and then have 6 arms or whatever the form of the yidam is, that explodes your ordinary experience of physicality.
Right, but it doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't
It's
have
like
to be
it's
that
a
way.
felt.
Yes.
So one of the ways into Anu Yoga practice is through the feeling tone, the felt sense of arising as the yidam, and that may or may not include the very physical depiction. It could be, some people are aphantasic, and it's simply never going to be that way. And that doesn't mean that Anu Yoga practice is not available. It's much more like a complete synesthesia is the best way that I can describe it.
I have 2 questions, I guess. The first one is in the external part of the yidam practice, when you kind of visualize the yidam separate from yourself. Can you speak a little bit more about this? You were saying a lot about how it takes a lot of the time and effort to kind of get this like visceral sensation of presence of that yidam kind of next to you in some sense. How important is the part where is there like some actual relationship between you and the yidam happening, in a sense of not just me perceiving the yidam, but yidam kind of in some sense like perceiving / communicating? That probably is like one question. And the other one is, since there are so many yidams, and since yes, we all don't quite have the eons to experience all of these very varied luminous states, how would you usually advise people, like what's kind of this decision point, and like does one go seek experiencing more of these transmissions, different yidams, versus going in and like, specific practice very deeply?
I would say it's so individual. it really, and it seems to vary greatly according to personality and experience and history and background. I'm not sure if that's answering the question that you were asking, but like how you were saying, like how do you, with all of this variety, how do you know which when? Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, sort of. I
Yeah.
have like a specific
Right.
practice right now that I've
Yeah.
been doing for a while.
Yeah.
And yeah, there is like some amount of like when you and others describe all the different
Yeah.
varieties in which
Yeah.
can happen.
Yeah.
Yidam's
Well,
calling.
usually one-on-one, I quite often I'll just ask somebody like, well, you know, do you have a felt sense of which yidam is you know, is there a particular yidam that you feel some affinity with, or does some yidam standing out for you? So, you know, if somebody comes to me in a one-on-one and says, yeah, you know, I kind of feel like I really want to get into some yidam practice. I'm like, which yidam? Or we will have that conversation. You know, somebody fairly recently said, oh, I just have been reading about Lingesar and coming to get to know a little bit more about that narrative. And I just feel this massive attraction to Lingesar. It's like, great. You know, I think the more connection and affinity and attraction that you feel to this this other being, the more possibility there is there for like that energy to motivate you into practicing. I mean, desire is great in Tantra. It's very welcome, very welcome.
And maybe you can speak some to the first question, where like how much in the practice of like external yidam, like is it the dynamic mostly you relating to the yidam and kind of perceiving it, or is it kind of, does it ever like go both ways? Because I feel like for me at least, some part of it is like I am getting this sort of similar feeling as that like is characteristic of interacting with a person. Like there is some amount of like creativity happening, there is some amount of like inspiration happening, there is some amount of like the sensations that usually arise from being observed happening. Like how much of that is a feature of the practice, leaning more into it, whatever you have associated to that.
I think that's pretty normal. It's like an indication that something is going on there, and that the practice is having an effect and functioning in the way that it's intended to. I mean, it sounds that way to me. Would you add anything to that, do you think? Yeah.
I have a question from an online participant. Matthew asks, could you say more about the antinomian aspects of Tantra as brought up in the story about the Kenpo? How do we think about that as contemporary Tantric practitioners?
The antinomian aspects, that's a good question for you, I think.
This has been a puzzle for well over 1,000 years. How do we relate to this? Some of the tantric scriptures are very extreme in systematically violating taboos. And what are we to make of that? And that's been a problem all along. One way of thinking about this is that Indian society at that time was had a whole lot of rigid taboos that slotted you into a very narrow identity, And Tantra is about opening possibility for self-possibility, is your phrase, that you can be much more diverse and much more bigger than some prescribed role. Our society already systematically violated all taboos in the 1960s, and we know how that goes, and we don't need to do that again in the same way. So a lot of this antinomian trend in Tantra is not, I think, very functional for us. That said, we do have all kinds of, limiting, often self-imposed, limiting, behavioral norms that are not necessary, and practicing Tantra is likely to lead to your violating a lot of those in ways that might be surprising for other people. I don't think it's helpful to be shocking, probably.
For its own sake.
For its own sake. I mean, occasionally
Yeah.
shocking people if there's some very specific reason.
I'm speaking to
Speaking to
Matthew on the live stream. So there's a connection. I think there's a cultural connection that we have between transgression and harm. One of the ways that tantric practice can facilitate transgression is by decoupling it from harm. If you are habitually used to having that association just in your whole relationship with authority or structures or institutions or whatever it is, bureaucracy, somehow separating out the experience of doing something different and unconventional from this is going to be harmful could be really valuable. And that's one of the ways that I think it could help, could work.
There's a supposedly, in order to practice Tantra at all, you have to take a series of vows. One of the vows is to drink piss. That was extremely taboo in the society in which this vow was formulated. In Tibet, nobody drank piss, so all of them were in violation of their vows. This is a practice you can try. I did. I recommend it. I have a blog post about this about 6 months ago. Called, what's it called?
Piss Buddha.
Piss Buddha? I mean, it's a little taboo here, and there's a lot of giggling because, wow, I've just violated a taboo. This guy is sitting up here saying you should drink piss. So, it's harmless if it's your own. It's an interesting experience, you know? You have a glass of it and you're kind of looking at it and going, am I actually going to do this? And then you bring yourself to do it and it's fine. It's not a big deal. You know, Tantra opens you to that possibility of blowing through some behavioral norm that doesn't have any actual function.
So, is this on?
Can you hear me now? Yes. good,
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a question. You've started talking a bit about it with the concept of it being alien. I'm not a practitioner of anything Tantra, although like I have some experience of people around me using it to great effect. And so understand my question from that perspective. But you mentioned during the outline that one of the things that you could talk about is what yidam practice isn't, or and when you're talking about this, one of the things it makes me think of is, in a vague sense, like invocation, just the the bringing into self of something other. And I was wondering if you could speak to that, but just in whatever way you thought was interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that superficially sound similar to yidam practice that probably are misleading as analogies. I don't actually have significant experience with most of them, so it's a little difficult to say. I practiced Wicca before I practiced Buddhism. So there's a relationship with the gods in Wicca, which is Western witchcraft, that I think is pretty dissimilar. Sam here has this excellent book, which he's presented me with a copy of. I've read a PDF of an earlier version and liked it and can recommend it. He has synthesized Western ceremonial magic with Buddhist Tantra. So that is something that is possible. There's enough analogy there. Voodoo is sometimes mentioned in this context. I have read about voodoo. There's a lot of in Buddhism. There's what's called view, which is the theoretical understanding. I'm against philosophy, so I don't want to translate the word view as philosophy, because philosophy is bad and view's all right. I think the view that one takes in respect to the yidam as deity is unlike that of any other practice of relating to deity. So if you think about it in terms of, yes, this sounds similar to voodoo, well, probably there's some, maybe even the mechanism is the same of spirit possession. I don't know. I don't think we know what the mechanism is, but the view is so different of what a yidam is versus what the loa is, which is the voodoo deity. I don't know. Is that relevant?
Yeah.
Cool.
And it wasn't specifically so much about the invocation, but just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak about what yidam isn't.
Oh well, yeah. So I've got an outline. On the other hand, it's past 8. We should be moving into getting snacks soon. But what yidam isn't? Where do we have it here? Right. We had. This is an important thing, that it is not creative imagination. This is, Charlie mentioned this is a somewhat subtle point, because it's described as generation or creation. It is the creation stage of Tantra, is the creation of the visualization, but it's not creative in the sense that you're producing a new one. This is a really important thing, that you are not, if you try to create, if you get creative about it, you're just going to be manifesting your own psychology. And the point here is to not do that. It is to step into an entirely different psychology. It is not narrative. So you can relate to the gods and have a conversation with them and have some interaction with them and go for a walk on the beach with your favorite deity in your imagination. And that can be a very powerful and important and useful practice, and it is not yidam practice. Yidam practice is it's static in a certain sense. You're not doing different things. There's no narrative. You're just having this relationship directly and finding the felt experience of that. Not an archetype, we did that. Yeah, I think that was all of the points that I had in my outline. Maybe since it's now almost 8:15, would this be a good time to move into the lounge area and be more informal, and you can bring up your questions that are maybe a little more personal if that's of interest, and get to know each other. I know quite a number of you. It's nice to see you here. I don't know all of you yet. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
This has really been enjoyable for me.
Thank you both. This was fantastic. And thank you, David, for the 2025 Alembic curriculum, which is hang gliding, cocaine, Vajrayana, and drinking pee. So stay tuned. It was inspiring. Okay, a couple of things I want you to know, which is that if you aren't signed up yet, Charlie will be here all day tomorrow teaching. So we'll be able to get into some practice, do more Q&A. Charlie, can you tell us a little bit about tomorrow?
Oh, it's okay.
Back now, yeah. It is. It's a practice day. We'll have four practice sessions. Opening awareness. We'll have some from Kaleidoscope of Interaction and maybe the Liberating Shadow. It depends how we go for time.
Just a little couple words about what each of those things are.
There'll be some pair work methods, maybe some solo reflection, looking at our own personal habitual ways of interacting, and then we'll have some practices related to how we are in that domain, that field. And we have a yidam practice, Avalokitesvara, in the afternoon. And we have some movement. We'll have some movement after lunch, Dzogchen movement practice. So just kind of a little bit of experience from different modes of practice that has become available to Evolving Ground. Yeah.
Wonderful. So that's tomorrow from 10 to 5 here in person or online. And we had someone ask if they could start the morning online and come after lunch.
Totally.
And I said yes. Okay, good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Glad that was the right.
Yeah.
And Evolving Ground, the practice community, meets here the third Sunday of each month in the afternoon. And that's a more informal, less structured, just a meditation and a discussion. So if you want to kind of go deeper with Evolving Ground, third Sunday of each month right here. And then there's one other thing I want to tell you about, which some of you may be interested in. 2 weeks from today, we have Tina Rasmussen, who is one of the best living jhana practitioners out there. So if you had enough with all this yidam stuff and you want to just go into a jhana, she's going to be here all weekend leading an event called What is Awakening? So if you're curious about that, that's 2 weeks from this weekend. It's going to be it's very special to have Tina here. I'd encourage you all to come and check her out. And in the short term, please come check out the lounge where we will have tea and snacks. And you can leave your cushions because the people here tomorrow for Charlie will use them. So please join me in thanking Charlie and David again. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. Mm.